Welcome to Relanza, the podcast that connects you with expert voices on the most innovative topics in language education. I'm Mercedes Querol from the Universidad Internacional de La Rioja and the coordinator of this space. Don't miss it. Relanza starts right now.
Welcome to this podcast from Relanza. My name is Darío Luis Banegas. I work at the University of Edinburgh, and today I have the pleasure of talking with Fernando Trujillo Sáez from the University of Granada. Fernando, how are you?
Well, I'm delighted to chat with you for a while, Darío. Truly an honor and a pleasure to be here on Relanza as well.
The pleasure is all ours. So, Fernando, just to break the ice, tell me or tell us three things that you'd like people to know about you.
Well, I think the first one, which is the fundamental one, at least from an academic point of view, you've already said it, I'm a teacher at the University of Granada in the Department of Language Education and the Faculty of Education, Economics and Technology in Ceuta. Maybe the second, to keep us in this academic plane, because now what I would like to say is that I am a father of two children, and this kind of more personal things, but to keep us in an academic plane, well, I coordinate the research group Open Knowledge for Social Action, which is a very multidisciplinary group from economists to nurses, pedagogues, and psychologists, which is also based in Ceuta, and from which we try to think about society and education with a view as plural as possible, as intercultural as possible. And thirdly, because it is really a key area of work for me, well, I am a founding member of DeConnecta 13, which is a spin-off of the University of Granada, from which we try to work on innovation, research, and project management, mainly linked to professional development, to training, and to education. Those would be my three professional pillars.
Perfect, Fernando. And we believe that, precisely in relation to your experience and the elements that you've just mentioned, that's why we have invited you to talk with us today to discuss the digitization of the language curriculum, which is the focus of this podcast. So I'll move to onto our first question, and it has to do with what challenges does the digitalization of the curriculum pose for language teaching?
Well, the first challenge is a challenge of awareness, because I believe, and we could discuss reasons to support this claim, that there is no longer a language learning that is not digital. And by extension of this claim that there is no non-digital language learning, well, linguistic education and language teaching curricula neither stay out of the digital field, nor can they stay out from the perspective of the ethical and professional responsibility that we have in relation to our students. And within this idea of digital transformation, well, there is like a layer that has reached us, especially since 2022. And that is that there will not be a language learning or a language teaching that does not have artificial intelligence as a base operating system. That is, the new ecosystem of language learning is digital. I encourage any listener of this podcast who is a teacher to ask your students how long it has been since they consulted a paper dictionary, or to ask himself honestly how long it has been since he or she consulted a paper dictionary. Here in my office, I have all the major dictionaries one is expected to have in paper. And I admit that, well, that normally when I need to look something up, I end up turning to digital tools. And we could extend this to many other realities. Therefore, the first challenge of digitalization is that it is already here, and we have to be aware of it. And in the specific field of language teaching, well, digitalization generates a very interesting phenomenon, which is the expansion of the continuum in which we have always worked. We have always worked in a continuum, in an extreme of which was learning guided by a teacher, and in the other extreme was autonomous learning, absolutely autonomous. So a learner who is subject to learning processes, either by immersion or outside of immersion processes, but through tools that he manages alone. And suddenly, between both possibilities, a huge gap has been created, which is learning guided or mediated by technology. And that third possibility grows very fast. due to the huge investment of capital risk funds in the field of language teaching, generating, well, a whole phenomenon, well, that we could call platformization of language learning. We are going to start seeing the growing presence of chatbots and artificial intelligence tools that aim to act as mediators and guides for students' language learning. That is the second great challenge beyond raising awareness is the expansion of the continuum of possibilities for language teaching and learning. And then we could go deeper into different elements that are affected. For example, discourse genres. Today we have to talk about discourse genres from the perspective of new literacies. And new literacies lead to the concept of pluriliteracy. That is, Dario, in my opinion, what we are living could almost be seen as a new rewriting of the field of language teaching and consequently of curricula. So the challenge is huge and exciting. I think we have to live it with passion and optimism.
Absolutely, and I believe that is spot on. I think we know it. It is absolutely right and gratifying if you want to hear from you. That one of the challenges is the presence of artificial intelligence. It is already here. It is already among us. So we cannot ignore it. We cannot pretend that it is not there and that we are already using it. That seems very interesting to me. And with respect to the second challenge, what you mentioned, the expansion and this learning already mediated by technologies, and how also that educational proposal continues to expand. And we could even say that it exceeds the context of formal education because people don't need to go through a school or a university to learn languages.
Sure, what we are actually witnessing is how that boundary is fading away. Because I was recently in a conference dedicated to World CLIL, where we reflected in Dublin about how well digitization affects the two main areas of language learning, which are social and pedagogical tasks that lead to language acquisition. The social tasks, well, we already have evidence that many of our learners are using chatbots to develop communication interaction with the purpose of learning languages. And of course, this could happen in formal education contexts, but it's happening mainly in autonomous learning processes. You'll see that I'm reluctant to call it non-formal education or informal education, because what we are seeing is an overflow of this classic trilogy. In other words, what we have is the process of an individual who becomes aware of the importance of language learning, turns to technology to learn, and carries out with technology social tasks that, quite literally, would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. This is because the arrival of large language models with their capacity to generate text, and of course we could later discuss whether that text generation is valid or what risks might involve, etc. But what is evident is that the capacity to generate text, well, has clearly opened up the possibility for social tasks, which the Common European Framework of References for Languages already defined as fundamental for language acquisition to be done through technology today. And that's without even mentioning pedagogical tasks. I think the great revolution brought about by large language models is happening above all in relation to feedback. Who provides feedback? How is the feedback provided? What kind of feedback is it? And then there's a word or a question we hadn't really paid much attention to before. When? Because of course a teacher, for example, at Spanish universities often finds themselves having to work with a ratio of 1:60, teaching English, French, or German with a ratio of 1:60. How can you possibly give timely feedback at the right moment to 60 learners while also addressing all their diversity and richness? It's really quite complex. And now, large language models, I prefer to call them the massive language models, they allow us to provide adequate, reasonably precise and adjusted feedback in a very short time. And we already have some scientific evidence that this increases the grit, the persistence, and the will to keep learning. Because there is feedback in real time or almost in real time that stimulates the will to learn. That is, we are really going to see how even the micro-level aspects of our profession are going to be affected by digitization.
Absolutely, absolutely. And well, that's exactly where the challenges you mentioned come in, right? How to approach them and carry them out in a sustainable way. And thinking about formal education,
Um,
if we focus on that context, in your view of quality education, does it include the digital transformation of language curricula?
Yes, absolutely. Among other things, as a good friend of mine used to say, Antonio Rodriguez de las Heras, professor at the Universidad Carlos III, he used to say that at least the teachers, and here we would also include the language teachers, we have to rise to the challenges of society, not only of education, but of society. And if our students in formal education are using technology for such delicate and such important issues as to talk about issues like mental health with a chatbot, well, we have to be there to help them understand what are the limits of technology, what is its potential, what are the risks, what are the benefits that technology can bring us. I mean, at the very least, the digital transformation of language curricula is essential to keep up with the challenges of today's society and with the kind of linguistic and communicative use our learners make of technology. But more than that, I think technology can be a lever for language learning. You know, I in a talk I gave recently, the title was "Technology, a Lever or a Bull in a China Shop," right? And it's true. We're always wondering, are we going to mess something up with technology, or will it actually help us to improve things? Well, I think that obviously as professionals we have to have a critical view, but also optimistic and pragmatic one when it comes to the use of technology. I like to think in terms of sustainability. I think it's an important concept to look at our practices through the lens of sustainability. And in our research group, we work with a 5-dimensional model, which help us understand whether a particular innovation can actually be beneficial or not. Community sustainability, which allows us to ask ourselves, let's see, in the specific case of language learning, can digitalization actually increase the well-being of the community in terms of learning, in terms of quality of the educational experience? Does this well-being also extend to the whole community? Or do we still have gaps that make us realize and anticipate that some people might be left out, just as we saw happen during the COVID lockdowns? So the first thing to consider would be, is there community sustainability? Is it beneficial for everyone? For example, some contributions that have been come from Universal Design for Learning, applied to the field of languages through digital transformation, help us understand that technology can actually be a lever to help all of us learn languages better. But then there are other concepts such as institutional sustainability, that is, whether the educational institution can support and does effectively support language learning. And we have spent a lot of time thinking and rethinking the concept of schools' language policy. We don't believe that language learning should happen only inside the classroom as if it were a silo, closed as a sealed compartment. Rather, in an educational institution, language learning should influence every aspect of that institution's life, and it has to filter through all the classrooms and all the subjects. And that's what we mean by institutional sustainability. These 2 dimensions would be the strong sustainability of any educational innovation, and more specifically of the digitalization of language curricula. But from here, there are other dimensions that we also have to consider and that we call weak sustainability. And they are socio-political sustainability, that is, whether the regional and national regulations actually support the digitalization of language teaching, whether language curricula make reference to what we might call digital or electronic genres, whether they encourage the use of technological tools, whether there's also funding and training to help teachers actually use them. This would be socio-political sustainability. But we are increasing dimension. Global sustainability, looking at whether the changes taking place within an educational center are aligned with the global trends and also whether there's a critical understanding of those global trends so they can be adapted to the local context.
Sure.
And finally, well, ecological sustainability, which is a dimension that I think we should never forget because well, this is where we live. We don't live somewhere else on another planet. So we need to be aware of the ecological impact. And even when we talk about digital transformation, well, we have stopped and asked ourselves, bringing digital technology into our language classrooms, does it have an ecological footprint? Does it have a positive or negative impact? What can we actually do to reduce that footprint? How can we keep track of things from energy use and water consumption to recycling materials? I mean, I think that digital transformation has also allowed us to rethink language teaching, not just in terms of code and form, but from a perspective that connects with the socio-political, the global, the ecological. And I believe that only from this kind of lens can the arrival of digital technology truly foster much more harmonious processes of development, both for individuals and societies, Dario.
Yes, absolutely. And as you've rightly pointed out, these are issues, or rather, these different layers of sustainability aren't necessarily being worked on or addressed or presented in a truly harmonious way. And my last question, Fernando, is precisely in relation to what we have discussed about digital transformation. What specific role does the AI or artificial intelligence play in the process of digitalizing the language curriculum?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, AI is going to become the basic operating system behind all our interaction with the digital world. Because, the capacity of AI in any of its many forms is enormous. Sometimes we say AI, we say artificial intelligence, without really thinking that it's actually an umbrella term that covers a lot of different things. And that within AI, we're talking about machine learning, we are talking about deep learning, we are talking about the use of chatbots, we are talking about, for example, some recent advances in cognitive robotics. We are talking about large language models. We are talking about a universe with truly fascinating depth. And I'm afraid that when it comes to language learning, we've only seen the tip of the iceberg so far. But artificial intelligence is going to infiltrate not only every aspect of language learning, but every aspect of our lives. More specifically, in the case of language learning, we could look at the relationship between artificial intelligence and language learning. To put it very simple, from two perspectives. The positive perspective, well, it's going to allow us to enhance the linguistic activities that are essential for language acquisition, in the sense that anyone will have much easier access to them. And when I say anyone, we'll later make some distinctions in terms of the different gaps that emerge. But overall, it will be much more accessible. People will be able to produce text, to receive text, to interact, and, for example, to mediate not only between concepts and texts, but even between situations. I think we can already see some applications of artificial intelligence that are making a significant difference. The use of chatbots for developing oral interaction is particularly noteworthy, and all the data suggests that language acquisition tends to be higher when chatbots are more used than they aren't, although, of course, we still have certain doubts about how far oral communication competence can actually transfer from the machine to real social contexts. That is, many of our teenage students actually prefer talking to a chatbot rather than to other teenagers in different situations. And that's something we really need to look into. Still, I'm positive about this, but at the same time, I also think we need to be critical of artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence wasn't created for education, nor was it designed for language learning. It was created for other purposes and with other interests in mind. So we need to stay deeply alert to who owns artificial intelligence, how we use it, how our data is protected. There are two ideas here: ethical artificial intelligence and trustworthy artificial intelligence, both absolutely fundamental. In other words, we need to keep asking ourselves all the time, was this designed ethically? Can we really trust this artificial intelligence resource? So, artificial intelligence is going to play a major role in language learning, but it will demand from us a deep sense of critical thinking. To begin with, the range and the number of languages represented within the large language models. So, in my view, it's an incredibly exciting moment to be involved in language teaching and research, Dario.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that perhaps, well, it's precisely within that of this historical moment of being part of it that this podcast also finds its place. Fernando, it's been a real pleasure listening to you, a pleasure talking with you, and having you as part of Relanza. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Well, folks, we'll see you in another episode. Thanks so much.
Relanza is a project funded by the Directorate for Knowledge Transfer at UNIR and developed in collaboration with the Prodigy Research Group and the Language Curriculum SIG of the British Association for Applied Linguistics. Don't forget to visit our website to learn more about this topic and to find ideas for your lessons.